I'm Leanne Faraday-Brash, and this is a continuation of our Outstanding Leader series. We're chatting today with a gentleman who's actually got a fairly lofty ambition. The vision of his organisation is no less than eradicating world poverty. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to, from Thankyou, Daniel Flynn. Daniel, thanks very much for joining me.
Great to be part of it, Leanne.
Thank you. And I believe you just literally got off a plane from New Zealand.
I did.
And have had about one night's sleep over the last 3 nights?
Yeah, I'd say, one on average. So, about 8 hours in a couple of nights, feeling a bit tired.
Okay.
We'll get through it.
We'll get through it. Okay. Daniel, I guess first thing I'd like to ask you is really just about the business model.
Yeah.
You've been very open in the press by talking about the fact that at the very beginning of the Thankyou journey, you didn't know what you were doing.
Yes.
And it seemed to me as if you adopted that Japanese management theory principle of Mayuga.
Yeah.
Make it up as you go along.
Make it up as you go along.
But I do gather that you probably had some principles that for you were absolutely non-negotiable and some things you were determined to do and not to do. What were some of those?
Well, it's a fascinating thing because right now we fight to keep this sort of naivety that we had. And it's a naivety, it's a lack of understanding of maybe the norm or the status quo in business or markets. But it's also a naivety or a belief that the way we see the world, we're not going to compromise on that. And so for example, at the beginning, we said 100% of the profits from this product, bottled water, which became more products, but 100% of the profit will go to funding the eradication of poverty, the funding of water programs. And that's because we wanted something that existed purely for that outcome. But then you go meet with accountants or different people in business and they're like, but what do you mean by that? And you could structure it like this. And we'd be like, oh, nah, can't be that. It needs to be 100%. But how would you scale? You'd need investment. Yeah, I'm not sure how that bit's going to work, but we can't change this premise that it all exists for impact. And so that could almost be seen as arrogance, and it was never intended. It wasn't that. It was just we want to do something different. We want to do something that hasn't been done before, not just for the fun of that, but because we want to get a result that we're yet to see in the market. So the vision of eradicating poverty, I mean, that's not just our vision. There are so many organisations driven to help end that. And when we started, we said we want to get in this space and support it by accessing the consumer dollars. So not go after what people are already doing with their donations and say, come to us, we're new. No, we wanted to go after a new market. But to do that, this 100% model was, we thought, a non-negotiable, and we've stuck to it ever since. It has not been easy, and it still isn't. But that's one thing for us.
Okay. You've just talked about profit as a goal in order to be able to help people. And if the rumours are true, you were quite an enterprising young man from a very early age. You were responsible for me laughing out loud very spontaneously on a tram once when I read in chapter 1 about your gobstopper enterprise. Selling them at school?
Yeah.
Yes. Tell us how much you made from that.
Oh, it was a bit disappointing. I made a lot of money from it, but then profit, which is a key little thing in business, it turns out, it was negative about 5 cents. And it was disappointing because I got all this money, but Mum had lent me the money to do it. And she's was being a pretty good parent. She's like, that wasn't a gift, it was agreed upon. I was loaning. And when I added up what I had to pay back, it's negative 5 cents. And I kind of worked out I'd eaten the profit literally, like literally eaten it, or I'd given it to friends because I thought I'm making all this money and you can have one. And I think in the book I said I had quite a lot of friends during that phase of my life.
Yes.
Free gobstoppers did help, but fascinating lesson. Don't eat your profit, but kind of the beginning of business for me.
Okay, all right. And I guess, would that be one of the reasons why you decided to be very, very strict about quarantining disbursements and profit in the business?
Yeah, so we did something at the beginning which is a bit maybe odd to some people, but we had a bank account. So we had 2 bank accounts, and one was our profit account. And I know this doesn't work, accountants listen to this would be pretty upset, but we put our profit into that account. Now, how do we know it's profit? We didn't. We just said the industry average profit margins are here. Cool. So every dollar that comes in, we'll make sure we just put the profit away. And what that allowed us to do is every quarter we'd start giving. So to this day, we give money out before the end of financial year because we've protected these profits. They are ultimately, for us, profit is impact. All of our profit funds our programs, and we have to protect that and fight for that and not eat it or not kind of just get lazy or caught up in fast growth, because you can have your top line growth but not get profit. And so,
or drive higher expenses such that they're not in
line.
Yeah.
And look, every business goes through this. It's not as easy as just having a separate account. We've got a lot more complicated these days, but the thinking hasn't changed. Protect profit, fight for profit, because it is a fight to get it.
Okay. We hear the buzzword agility everywhere. Everyone's wanting to be more agile.
Yeah.
But some of my clients are still slavishly devoting themselves at regular intervals to 5-year plans. Is there such thing as a relevant 5-year plan anymore?
I'm not a business expert. I can talk from Thankyou's perspective. So we would have plans for the future. They're quite loosely held. 5 years, 10 years. They're, to be honest, I just put it on paper because our board requested it. So I thought I'd better do this properly. But they're quite loose. Some would say lofty. I don't believe that. I believe we can meet these kind of targets. But the plan isn't so rigid that we cannot pivot or change on a monthly or weekly basis, because the reality is agility and agile and these great words that are thrown around, they exist because every market is getting disrupted at a faster rate. Competition is increasing. It is not as easy to make a profit, particularly profit these days, than it was, back in the old days. As some of Graham on our board, he's 78 years young. At one point, he ran the most profitable company in Australia. And his journey is fascinating because he looks at the margins we make now and dealing with the likes of Coles and Woolworths and these big retailers. And, it is a tough gig. But you've got to be agile, because you've got to be willing to change quickly, to flex, and even be willing to challenge all of your assumptions, not just some of them. So we're in that phase again right now. I feel like every year we're always challenging our thinking. And it's not necessarily a comfortable process, but it's helped us grow.
Okay. I'm glad you really called Graham 78 years young, because I'm feeling decidedly ancient, surrounded by everybody at the engine room that is Thankyou out there with all those incredible people and wrestling with the road noise as well at the same time. You made no secret in the book of the fact that you've had a lot of mentors and believers and supporters along the way. Interestingly, you don't name them. But if you could isolate them, which were a couple of those messages that came to you just at the right time and just in the right way?
Yeah, it's funny, I was trying to figure out whether to name or not name, because I'm really big on honour and, honouring those that have had input. But I think there's been so many people that have had input along our journey, and at different times. I think for me, George Savides was one of my great mentors who, when I was 15 years old, my dad walked up to him at a business breakfast, just from the crowd. My dad's a bit out there. He's like, I like what you're doing. I think my son might do something like you one day. He was the CEO of Medibank Private. My dad says, could my son do work experience with you? George says, me? He goes, yeah, with you. He goes, I haven't done that before. And somehow George, out of the kindness of his heart, ended up agreeing to it. And I followed him around, and to this day, he has been so good at stretching my thinking. In the very first week or day at work experience, I sat in a room with him, and their team were talking not in millions, but in hundreds of millions. And they weren't even blinking. They were saying like 400 million, like seriously? And I'm like, what?
It's a long way from gobstoppers.
It's a long way from gobstoppers, but it got me thinking at a different level. And I think that's what George is so good at. And if I catch up with him, here's where I'm at, here's the challenge, it's all consuming. And he just has this great ability for me to kind of look up and realize that my big problem isn't necessarily that big in light of quite a big world. So George has been so good at that perspective shift. One of my mentors, Neil, gosh, he's challenging. I think I wrote about him in the book. I didn't name him, but I said, think after the 9 months, there was a 9-month gap in catching up. And I told him, I confessed, I said, it's been a while since we caught up. I never wanted to catch up with you again after the last one. Because he said things I didn't want to hear. And I walked away thinking, nah, he's got no idea. And it was interesting because the next 9 months, the things he said played out. The kind of character or flaws that he saw potential in my leadership and my team played out. I caught up with him, I just said, I'm sorry. Like I kind of was so proud and I thought I knew, but you saw it. And Neil has continually called out my blind spots, and that is uncomfortable. Yeah. But man, I'm grateful for it because I wouldn't be here without it. And, I think consistently, every person who's mentored has I'm just even thinking of Craig, who I'm catching up with a lot lately, and he says things like, I'm really proud of you because what you are doing is not easy, but you're doing so well. And sometimes you need to hear that. You need that encouragement from people that have done it 10 times greater than you have. Mm-hmm. Because I think there's a part of me, and maybe all of us, maybe just me, that thinks, I still don't have it all together. You know what I mean? Like I'm not perfect, I'm not nailing it. And to meet other humans who've got great stories and to kind of get that encouragement is so important.
It sounds like Craig and Neil are a good foil for each other.
They are. There's a great balance.
One of them is holding up a mirror and saying, you've still got a long way to go. Yeah. And the other one is saying, but you're doing good. You're growing and learning every day.
And they swap roles every now and then. So, yeah.
They probably feel a bit guilty that one of them's been either too soft or too hard on you. Okay. Now you mentioned teamwork. Yeah. You broke one fundamental rule of business. Yeah. Never go into business with family and friends. Yeah,
so we broke that rule twice, basically. Broke that one twice. So Justine is our incredible co-founder, brand director. We're married, and Jared is, we're still best mates, which is cool. In fact, we were speaking together 2 days ago in Sydney and last week in Singapore. And we're on this stage together and we're talking about the power of collaboration. And Jared and I, as an example, we're at opposite ends of the spectrum. And so our strengths and our weaknesses kind of complement. And people often ask, well, how do you do it? Mm. Friends, marriages, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And you're right, it is, there's a reason why people say that. And I think it's good advice. But if you can make it work, where it is powerful is trust. Trust in business is kind of everything. And so there's not a day in 9 years where I've ever wondered, what's Jared going to do, or what's Justine going to do behind me, or to, like there's dynamics that I meet other business people and I think, we've never even had to go through that. We have each other's back. We love each other. Love's an interesting word, but I think it's an important word in business, because if we truly love staff, love people, we'll do things above and beyond what's maybe necessary. But I think it's that kind of deeper love, soppy word, but important word, because it builds unity. When you are unified, there's some quote somewhere that says, you're an unstoppable force. And I look at our team and I'm like, that's an unstoppable force. Yeah. But it's because of that unity, and it's come from the top. Best mates and girlfriend, now wife. So.
It is pretty magical. And I heard it said once that opposites attract, but can they live together? Yeah. I'm guessing that the three of you don't necessarily agree on the strategic direction or what to do next all the time. Yeah. How do you go about that decision-making process? Because other boards and other senior management teams may actually on paper appreciate the diversity, but when the going gets tough, what are the sort of behaviours they default to? Yeah. So what do you do when your backs are up against the wall and there might even be a time pressure and you just can't agree, but you love each other and care about each other to want to bring the others along for the ride? How do you do that? Okay, so look, it's interesting, Justine and I are so similar. We do these like profile tests, and the guy who runs it, he's like, I haven't seen two people so close. But then kind of feel for Jared, because he's at the other end of the spectrum of two people that are married. Like, how's this going to end? But between the three of us co-founders, we have a general rule, and it's
I don't think we've ever crossed it, but all three of us have to agree. Now, if we don't, ultimately, and I'm so gracious for this, but Jared and Justine have made it so it's my call. So ultimately, I can make a call that one or the other doesn't agree with, and we roll. But I think that's been a very rare occurrence, and we're able to get each other on the same page. And why that's important is because when you are on the same page, there's this safety. The reality is we're all up against massive external pressures, and that is scary. And I'm reading a book, Simon Sinek, in this book, Leaders Eat Last. I'm only a few pages in, but I'm loving it. But he talks about this concept of like danger, and if you've got dangers on the inside of your organization, that ultimately will destroy you, because it's the dangers on the outside that you're actually trying to get together. So the three of us, we try and always stay on the same page. When it doesn't happen, I get to make a call. But now let's look at that in a wider team, because we have a board, we have a management team. So it creates some probably different dynamics. I mean, there'd be people who would just sound so foreign to them, but I think we've learnt to, even between the three of us, just because the three of us agree doesn't mean it's a good idea. It just means the three of us agree. And we've learnt that the more people we trust but bring on board who bring differences of opinion, the greater the outcome. And we're right now in a bit of a journey of a project that the three of us loved and agreed on. It hasn't really worked, and we're sort of through a bit of a painful mop-up process. And it's again a reminder to us of the importance of input and blind spot calling and that kind of collaboration. So, it's not perfect here. It may sound like a fairy tale. It is a fairy tale with a lot of tears, to be honest. It is, because it's an emotional roller coaster, leading vision, all the different dynamics. But we're really grateful for the dynamic we have.
Mm-hmm. As you talk about it, one of the things that strikes me that I love, and I think in some ways does differentiate you from a lot of the other executive leadership teams that I might work with, is that you are explicit about the decision-making process. You actually have a protocol that says it's not majority rules. So it could be the Flynn's gang up on Jared Burns. It is all of us need to be in agreement. But if we really are tussling, and if there is a window that's closing, we are going to default to Daniel's judgment. And we are all comfortable with the decision we've made about how we do decisions. So it's an explicit discussion, whereas some people just fight it out in teams and in boardrooms without ever having had the explicit conversation about how we're going to do stuff, particularly when it's difficult, particularly when there's a time pressure, particularly where it's a high risk, high value decision to be made. How do we go about that? So you've actually talked about that stuff and have a protocol, if you like, for addressing it. And I suspect that would help.
Big time. Yeah, because when the pressure's on, it is intense, and you default to something. So if you've got nothing, you're stuck. But for us, I suppose you're right. We've got a process that we follow, and it's actually the bigger we've got, the more important it is to have processes. And processes, and this word operational excellence, not stuff we celebrated early days, but right now in the organization we're screaming operational excellence from the rooftop, because the sustainability of this vision comes down to our processes and our systems. We can get growth, but if we don't get the fundamentals right, it's a short game, and we're in it for the long haul.
Yes, and that's in one sense the maturity of going from a small family business, literally, to wanting to have huge reach and putting in place all the foundation pieces to be able to grow and to achieve significant scale. Now, I never did marketing, but I remember learning about something called pester power, whereby the supermarkets would put all the delicious little treats right down there at eye level with all the kids. And I know, because my kids, 4 of them, bless them, would drive me mad about all of that stuff. But I'd have to say that Thankyou has actually redefined pester power. And I'm thinking of the helicopter story, above Coles and Woolworths, which is a pretty iconic story, and a lot of people would probably know it. But apart from the fact that you got 2 pilots to agree to actually fly the helicopters for free and put up the big banners above the respective duopolists' head offices. I was intrigued when you gave us the inside story in chapter 1 about the fact that one of those organisations came on board with a record turnaround, literally hours. And that by the time you got to the second one, probably them imagining you were trying to play the two off with each other, you said you could cut the air with a knife. The tension was unbearable. Tell us about that experience and what you did to turn it around.
Yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, people said in the early days, and even in the planning of this, there was a lot of, you can't do that. And the magic here is not much more than, you can't do that. Then we just go, why? Not like a smart aleck response, but internally it's why. So why can't you do that? And that's really important, because you start to break things apart and look at it from different angles. And that campaign was, you know, it's a first of its kind. It has got global attention in marketing circles, business case studies, books, uni books, and all we did was go, well, why not? What if we just did? I know it's against the kind of the maybe some unwritten rule, but that day what happened was power shifted. Coles and Woolworths are, you know, with respect, the 2 biggest retailers in our country, and they do a great job at, you know, fighting it out and market share and all that stuff, and they provide 70% of our country with product. But they have been known to be that duopoly, and at Thankyou, literally 10 of us in a boardroom hit play on a video and on YouTube and saw this call to action from school kids who are singing and dancing and uploading their videos to Telcos and Woolies to the helicopter pilots. And I think what would have happened, we weren't in the boardroom at Coles or Woolies. I did hear though that one of them had their actual board meeting the day we flew. We didn't plan that, it just happened to happen, and someone told me there could be
inspired serendipity.
Yeah, so that would have been an interesting board meeting. But those helicopters really made a statement of, you know, that we think there's a higher idea here, something bigger, something you haven't seen before, and it's very important to us that you see that. In our brand values, we talk about the need to stand out. And it's not for fame, and it's not for the needing to stand out. It's because we have something important to say and we need you to listen. And it's a tough market and it's crowded. So yeah, that second meeting, you could cut the air because it did appear to be a setup. Like, we walked into a meeting 3 days earlier, the other supermarket said yes. And I understand why everyone would be a little caught off guard by that, and our response is pretty good, that when that other supermarket moved their meeting forward 3 days, we did offer, and you guys said nothing would happen in 3 days, so we assumed nothing would. And in that room, you know, it was a bit intense, because now you've got a supermarket who's got their direct competitor who said yes to everything overnight. And they were in a position where they said yes as well 3 hours later, which was amazing. But that night, I remember, Justin and I don't know about Jared, but we went home and we were so emotional. Like, the whole thing had caught up with us. We were crying. We kind of climbed this mountain. And it was funny because that last meeting, it's just, we didn't essentially sign up. We didn't think we were signing up to make people's lives difficult. Do you know what I mean? Like, we signed up to help change the world, but now we were leading this journey of kind of antagonizing. And you got to understand that we came in outside of range review, which is the only time new products get on shelf. So you could be Coca-Cola, you could be Cadbury, L'Oreal, Unilever. You want a product on shelf, you turn up at range review. It doesn't happen outside that. So simply us doing this campaign and getting products ranged outside of range review creates weeks of work for these people. But we were okay, I suppose. Emotionally, we're a bit tired, but we're okay being uncomfortable, maybe personally viewed as annoying or other things, because we believed in our vision and we knew it was very important, not how we felt, but the outcome. the outcome is now product on shelf and millions of dollars raised, you know, and so we're proud of that. But the process was interesting.
It was certainly interesting. I mean, it was a go for broke campaign.
Yeah.
And it sounds as if there was some recognition that night in you and Justine that this was a watershed moment. This was the next stratosphere for Thankyou.